I'm Talia Nguyen, 29, a graphic designer turned streetwear entrepreneur. The room smelled like champagne and Chanel. Frosted glasses clinked over laughter too polished to be real. It was my cousin Maya's brand launch party, a pastel-themed pop-up held in an upscale loft on the Lower East Side. Every corner was curated for Instagram, neon quotes on acrylic, a vintage claw machine stuffed with silk scrunchies, custom cupcakes with edible gold, and in the middle of it all, a large display table overflowing with shirts. They weren't mine. They were from her new clothing line, a basic athleisure label that had somehow secured a sponsored feature from a lifestyle magazine I used to read while sketching mock-ups alone in my apartment. I stood at the edge of the venue, uninvited but not quite forbidden, clutching a bouquet I'd picked up from a bodega 3 blocks away. My name wasn't on the list. I knew it wouldn't be, but I came anyway. Dressed in one of my own pieces, a cropped jacket with hand-painted koi fish across the shoulders. Not that anyone noticed. A server with a manicured smile stopped inches from me, balancing a silver tray of champagne. I reached for one. She stepped back. "Oh, sorry," she said, eyes darting to my clothes, then to the clipboard at the front. "Are you on staff or—" I blinked. "No, She's not on the list," a voice interrupted. It was Tamara, Maya's brand manager. She barely glanced at me before refocusing on her earpiece, where she was coordinating a live stream. Security already told her. "I'm her cousin," I said, more out of habit than protest. Tamara didn't answer. The server nodded awkwardly and disappeared into the crowd of influencers and investment bros. I stood frozen, fingers still half closed as if the glass were in them. If you've ever been through something like this, stood outside the velvet rope while someone else claimed a version of your dream, drop a comment, or let me know where you're watching from. Hit like, or subscribe if family drama ever made you feel invisible too. Maya emerged from the upstairs balcony, flanked by her creative director and a photographer snapping bursts of pictures. She was glowing, glossed lips, designer tracksuit. Her name was printed on every tote bag, every coaster, even the napkins. The announcer tapped the mic and began the introduction. And now, the woman behind it all, Maya Nguyen, founder of M&D Studios. Let's give it up. The crowd clapped, she waved, she began her speech. I turned to leave. "Excuse me, are you Talia Nguyen?" a deep voice called out. I looked up. A man in a tailored navy suit stepped through the crowd. He was the editor-in-chief of Canvas Quarterly. I'd sent him a custom jacket 2 years ago, never heard back. He was holding a magazine. "I thought that was you," he said. "We just featured your brand in our summer issue. Didn't you get the call? We want you for our next streetwear cover story." The music stopped. Maya's speech stalled mid-sentence. Dozens of eyes turned. Someone whispered my name slowly, like it was a word they weren't used to saying out loud. I stood there, half in the shadows, half in the spotlight, and felt the room change. The silence was brief, but it cracked the air like glass. For once, it wasn't Maya they were watching. It was me. I wasn't supposed to be there. I wasn't on the guest list. I wasn't part of the brand campaign, and I definitely wasn't someone they had tagged in their soft-filtered behind-the-scenes posts. I was the cousin who always had cool ideas, who doodled on napkins, who wore beat-up Converse to family dinners. Not the face of anything, just the background. But now the man in the navy suit, a name I'd only seen in mastheads, had his hand on my shoulder and was smiling like he was looking at something polished. Not forgotten. "Your drop last month," he said. "I've never seen a jacket go that viral that fast. Who's managing your PR?" I blinked, unsure how to answer. I'm managing it myself." His eyebrows lifted. "Well, we need to fix that. Around us." The crowd slowly returned to motion, but it wasn't the same as before. People started whispering, nudging each other, subtly checking their phones. A girl near the Macaron Tower Googled my name. Another influencer, one of Maya's, tilted her phone toward her friend. I caught a glimpse of my brand's name on the screen. Tue by Talia. Maya descended the stairs. Her face unreadable. She wasn't smiling anymore. Talia, she said. Her voice tight. Too loud for comfort. Didn't know you were coming. I smiled without showing my teeth. Yeah, I figured I'd see what all the excitement was about. She glanced at the man beside me, clearly trying to recalibrate the situation. You two know each other. She's brilliant, he said, answering for me. You should have told me you were related. I've been trying to get her in for a feature since that sold-out koi capsule. I didn't move. I didn't fidget. For once, I didn't explain or shrink or try to smooth the tension. I just stood still, letting it happen, because something inside me, something quiet, long tamed, was unfolding, and it all started long before that party. I'd always loved to draw, even as a kid. I'd sneak into my parents' tailor shop and trace the shapes of old fabric scraps with chalk, pretending I was designing for runways instead of hemming slacks for accountants. But in our family, hobbies were hobbies. They weren't careers. They were distractions from real things like accounting, law, or pharmacy school. So I took the expected path, got good grades, followed rules, and ended up at a design firm doing digital layouts for corporate clients. I told myself it was close enough. I had health insurance, a title, and a boss who called me efficient. But at night, I drew, I painted, I thrifted jackets and painted stories across their backs. Storms, dragons, koi fish swimming against the current. I sold a few on Etsy, but nothing major. Mostly friends, mostly pity purchases, or so I thought. Then came the birthday dinner. It was Maya's. Of course. She'd just signed a small brand ambassadorship with an online retailer and was glowing with compliments. Everyone passed her gift bags, most filled with Sephora sets or mini bottles of Prosecco. I gave her something different. A hand-painted bomber jacket with an abstract moon on the back, made from a photo we took as kids in the park. She didn't open it. She smiled and said, "Thanks, Talia," then handed it off to someone else without even looking at it. Later that night, I saw it stuffed under a chair. I didn't say anything. I never did. But when I got home, I painted until sunrise. I was so angry I couldn't sit still. That was the beginning of Tui by Talia. I started small. Just me, my paints, and my busted sewing machine. I didn't have a logo. Just my name stamped inside every tag like a secret. I'd shoot my own lookbooks with my friend Zara, who posed in alleyways and rooftop stairwells and gas stations. I'd pack orders between Zoom meetings. Sometimes I'd cry because my hands hurt from painting all night. Sometimes I'd cry because it still didn't feel like enough. But slowly, people started noticing. A rapper wore my cloud jacket in a music video. A TikTok user stitched a haul and called it Next Level. Then I posted a time-lapse of my koi collection, the one I was wearing tonight, and it exploded. 500,000 views in 3 days. My inbox turned into chaos. People were begging for drops, and I could barely keep up. But I didn't tell anyone in my family, not because I was hiding, because I didn't want the silence again. The same silence I got every time I showed them a sketchbook. The polite nod. The immediate pivot to someone else's LinkedIn update. I told myself I'd show them when it was big enough to be undeniable. And now, here I was, at Maya's event. And I hadn't even planned it this way. I didn't realize you'd become so established, Maya said now, her voice taut with effort. Congrats. Thanks, I said simply. I didn't realize you'd still be using Helvetica for your logos. A few people nearby stifled laughs. Maya didn't. I felt a hand brush my sleeve. It was the editor again. "Hey," he said, lowering his voice. "Our photographer is here. Would you be okay with a quick photo for our piece?" Here I asked. He grinned. "Why not? You look incredible." "That jacket's a statement." I nodded. He stepped back and gestured. The photographer approached, camera already lifted. For the first time all night, I posed. Lights flashed. Somewhere behind me, someone muttered, "Is that Talia Nguyen?" "Wait, she's Tui." The name passed through the crowd like a current. Whispers spun into recognition. And I stood there, not center stage, but exactly where I needed to be. Not as someone's cousin, not as someone's hobbyist, but as myself. After the flash faded, I stepped away from the lens and into the hallway outside the venue. My hands were trembling, but not from nerves, more like release. My body had been coiled so tightly for years that I'd forgotten what it felt like to just breathe. The hallway was quiet, lined with exposed brick and flickering Edison bulbs, far from the curated chaos inside. I leaned against the wall and stared at the bouquet I was still holding. The paper had wilted a little. The stems had bent under their own weight. I thought about tossing it, but I didn't. "Hey." I turned. It was Zara, my best friend, my model, my first real believer. She'd snuck in through the back, just like we always used to sneak onto rooftops to take our first lookbook shots. "I saw it," she said, eyes gleaming. "The way he said your name, the silence, the pivot. That's how you know it's real." I smiled faintly. "I didn't plan any of this." "Doesn't matter," she said, handing me a to-go coffee she somehow smuggled in. "It happened." We sat on a bench across from a neon sign that read, "Manifest, then multiply." Maya's brand aesthetic. All soft pinks and quartz crystals and curated boss babe energy. I sipped the lukewarm coffee. "You remember the jacket I made her? For her birthday?" Zara rolled her eyes. "You mean the one she crumpled up like it was a dirty napkin?" "Yeah, I remember. She wore it in a post 3 months later." I said, "Cut the tags off and claimed it was from some indie designer she discovered on vacation. Didn't even tag me." Zara sucked in a breath. "Wait, seriously." I nodded. That was the first time I felt the split. It wasn't just that my family didn't believe in me. It was that, deep down, some of them knew I had something real and didn't want to admit it. Because it disrupted the order. Because it made them feel like maybe they'd missed something. Or worse, dismissed something too soon. After that, I stopped offering my work like it was a gift. I built it like it was armor. A year ago, I was still painting in the tiny corner of my studio apartment, barely fitting between drying racks and shipping boxes. I'd maxed out 2 credit cards to fulfill pre-orders. There were nights I didn't sleep, just curled up next to a space heater while jackets dried beside me like ghosts. I didn't complain. I didn't post motivational quotes or make behind-the-scenes reels. I just worked. Because I'd made a promise to myself I would never again put my worth in someone else's hands. Especially not hands that clapped only when the crowd already had. And slowly, I started to rise. I remember the first moment it felt different. It wasn't a viral post. It wasn't a feature. It was a DM. From a woman in Detroit who said my Ocean Bones jacket made her feel powerful for the first time in years. She said she wore it like armor to court during her custody battle. She said the koi made her feel like she was swimming upstream but still surviving. That's when it clicked. I wasn't just designing clothes. I was giving people something they didn't even know they needed. A way to show up in the world bold, messy, unrepentantly themselves. The sales grew after that. But more than that, the purpose grew. And still, I said nothing to my family. I didn't go to reunions. I avoided calls. I got good at smiling during holidays, nodding politely while they asked how freelance life was going, assuming it was a phase. I let them think I was drifting, because I was too busy building. Back at the party, the DJ had switched to a more ambient set. The crowd was thinning. Zara and I slipped back inside, not to stir things up but to watch the air shift from a new angle. Maya caught my eye from across the room. Her jaw was set, her smile plastic. She was cornered in conversation by someone clearly more interested in talking about me than her. I didn't gloat. I didn't strut. I just stood still, letting the silence speak louder than any speech. Ms. Nguyen, a woman approached me elegant, mid-40s, with a clipped French accent and an Hermès scarf tied tightly around her neck. "Do you have a moment?" I turned. "I'm Camille Laurent, creative director for Le Marais Atelier," she said. "We've been following your capsule work for months. Your texture layering, your thematic flow, it's astonishing. You don't just design garments, you design emotion." I could barely get words out. "Thank you. That's wow. That means a lot. We're curating a concept installation for Art Basel," she continued. "Matter of fact, 3 featured designers. We'd like you to be one of them." I stood frozen. Zara gripped my arm, whispering through her teeth, "Say yes before she changes her mind." "I'd love to," I managed to say, and we exchanged cards. As Camille left, the editor from earlier returned, now joined by a photographer flipping through the photos we'd just taken. "You've got presence," he said. "You don't even need to try. The camera loves honesty." Honesty. That's what I'd been painting into my work for years. All the pain I didn't say, all the rejection I didn't show, all the rage I stitched into sleep. Now it was speaking for me. I turned and spotted Tamara, the brand manager, hovering behind a column. She wasn't pretending anymore, just watching. Phone clutched, but not recording. Zara leaned in. "You know they're going to reach out now, right? Want a collab? A guest piece? Something to hitch themselves to your star?" "I know," I said quietly. "Will you?" "I don't know yet," because I hadn't decided what this moment meant. Was it vindication? Was it just another room with new rules? Or maybe it didn't need to mean anything at all. Maybe it was just the first time I didn't shrink. Before we left, I walked back to the table with the cupcakes and brand name cookies and picked one up not to eat, but to see the label. It was from a bakery I'd recommended to Maya 2 years ago, back when I still thought we'd build something together. I smiled. Not out of bitterness but clarity. Sometimes you don't get to rewrite the past, but you can stop handing it the pen. At the exit, a young woman approached me, barely 20, holding her phone tight. "I'm sorry," she said. "Are you the one who made the koi jackets?" I nodded. "Your work changed how I see my body," she said softly. "I used to feel invisible, but that jacket I felt seen. And just like that, it wasn't about Maya anymore. It wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about being exactly who I was, in front of people who finally saw me." The next morning, I woke up to over 700 new followers and 43 unread emails, most with subject lines like custom order request or brand collaboration proposal. But I didn't open any of them right away. I just lay there in bed, sunlight leaking through my curtain like warm paint, and stared at the ceiling. Zara had crashed on my couch, curled up under a quilt we'd made years ago from old thrifted tees. I could hear her soft breathing, the occasional rustle of fabric as she turned in her sleep. The hum of traffic outside felt softer than usual, like even the city was catching its breath. I rolled onto my side and picked up my phone again. The first message I opened wasn't from a PR firm or a buyer. It was from my aunt. "Aunt Min, Maya told me you caused a scene at her event. You need to remember your place in the family. We don't air grievances in public." I stared at the message for a long time. Then I swiped up and deleted it. No reply, no explanation, no more effort to belong to a place that had no room for me unless I was quiet, polite, invisible, because something had shifted last night, and not just in how the world saw me, it had shifted inside me too. I spent the rest of the day cleaning my apartment, not because it needed it, but because I did. I cleared out boxes of old paints, snapped dried brushes in half, and finally let go of the stack of rejected fabric swatches I'd hoarded like apology letters to myself. Then I turned to the small corner that used to be my whole studio, the folding table with the warped leg. The rack of half-finished prototypes I never felt confident enough to post. I took a deep breath and opened the top drawer. Inside was the original jacket, the one I made for Maya's birthday 2 years ago. The moon design still shimmered under the dim light. I'd spent hours layering the silver fabric, hand-stitched every crater. She never wore it. She never even looked at it. But I did. And now, I saw something different in it. I folded it carefully and placed it into a fresh box. No note, no return address. Just a tag tucked inside with a single line, "I was here too." Then I dropped it off at the nearest post office and walked away. That week, things moved faster than I could track. Camille from Le Marais emailed me a mock-up of the Basel installation, an entire wall of my painted jacket suspended mid-air with invisible wire, arranged to mimic the movement of a wave. She called it Flight After Flood. I didn't even have to ask what it meant. Canvas Quarterly sent over proofs for their cover story. Zara and I sat on the floor going through drafts, circling our favorite quotes in pink highlighter. Every photo made me feel like I'd already stepped into the future I used to only imagine during lunch breaks in my cubicle. And the orders, they didn't just double, they tripled. I had to hire someone. That's when the idea hit me. Not revenge, not payback. Something more satisfying. The email was short and professional. Subject: job opening, studio manager position, body high, Maya. I'm expanding TUI by Talia and need someone with logistics and social coordination experience, given your recent brand work. I thought you might be interested. Salary is negotiable. You'd report directly to me. Let me know if you'd like to talk. Talia. I hit send and stared at the screen, not out of malice, but curiosity. Would she even respond? 3 days later. She did. Maya Nguyen. Didn't expect this, but maybe I needed to. Let's talk. I'm open. I didn't know how to feel about it. I didn't hate her. I wasn't even angry anymore. I was just ready. Ready to move beyond the chapter where I kept shrinking to make space for someone else's comfort. We met at a small cafe near Koreatown. Nothing fancy. She arrived on time, dressed in neutral tones. No designer logos this time. There were no hugs, no apologies, just coffee. I won't pretend I wasn't threatened by you, Maya said, stirring her oat milk latte. You were always better than me at this stuff, and I didn't want to admit it. I nodded. I didn't want to compete. I just wanted to belong. She looked at me, eyes heavy. I think we both wanted the same thing, just in different languages. I didn't say anything. We talked business. I laid out the role, the expectations, the pay. She listened, asked smart questions, didn't flinch at reporting to me. At the end, she smiled, not the old polished smile, but something softer. Do I get a company jacket? You'll earn it, I said, when she started 2 weeks later. No one in my family quite understood it. Why would I hire her? Why not leave her in the past? Because I wasn't building a brand to punish people. I was building a world where I didn't have to disappear to feel safe. A world where I could be seen, not as someone's shadow, but as myself. We worked well together. Better than I thought. Maya was organized, efficient, and surprisingly humble. She didn't try to steal the spotlight. She didn't shrink either. She just did the work. One afternoon, I caught her studying one of the new koi jacket designs. She turned to me and said, "They're swimming differently now." "What do you mean they used to look like they were trying to survive?" she said. "Now they look like they're dancing." I didn't answer, but I felt the truth of it. One day, during a photo shoot, a young intern asked me what it felt like to make it. I didn't know how to answer, because there wasn't a single moment where it all clicked. There was just a long stretch of silence, then resistance, then the quiet decision to keep going. And then one day, you look up and realize people are watching, not because you beg them to, but because they can finally see what you saw all along. A few weeks later, I got invited to speak at a creative summit, my first ever. They wanted me to talk about sustainable storytelling through fashion. I had no idea what that meant, but I said yes anyway. Zara helped me prep. Maya offered to manage the logistics. When I walked on stage, the lights were so bright I couldn't see the crowd, but I could feel them leaning in, listening. I took a deep breath and said the only thing I was sure of. I used to think hobbies were just things you did when the real world wasn't watching, but now I think maybe they were the real world all along. We just didn't know how to listen. The room went still. Then came the applause. But it didn't feel like a performance. It felt like recognition, like every brushstroke, every ignored sketch, every stitched back mistake had finally made its way home. After the summit, I didn't rush off stage. I stayed behind as people filtered out, shaking hands, exchanging cards, answering questions from students who looked like I used to, uncertain but burning with ideas they hadn't dared to speak aloud yet. One girl with frizzy curls and glitter eyeliner waited until the very end. She held a denim vest in her arms, covered in embroidery and beaded details, messy, but raw, full of life. She looked at me nervously. "I don't have a portfolio yet, but I keep making stuff. I just don't know if it counts." I smiled. "If it's keeping you up at night, it counts." She laughed, a little teary-eyed. "Can I show you?" She pulled the vest out, shaking slightly, and laid it on the empty chair between us. There were patches stitched from old concert shirts, a lyric written in thread. On the back, a hand-sewn phoenix, rising not in flame, but in threads the color of bruises: purple, yellow, brown. I touched the fabric gently. "What's her name?" "I didn't name her," she said, embarrassed. It felt dumb. "Not dumb," I said. "Necessary." I gave her my email. She gave me a hug. It was small, but it stayed with me, because that was the moment I realized I wasn't just designing anymore. I was becoming the person I once needed. That night, I walked home instead of taking a car. The streets were still damp from a light rain, shimmering under neon restaurant signs. It reminded me of my first nights painting in this city. Windows cracked open to let out the smell of acrylics and ambition. I passed by the alley where Zara and I had done our first guerrilla shoot, her in a fur coat we found at a flea market, me balancing an old Nikon on a stack of cinder blocks. The bricks still had that same chipped green paint. I stopped and looked down at my phone. A new email blinked at the top of the screen. Subject: feature request. Forbes, 30 under 30. I let out a breath that sounded like a laugh. Then another. Zara texted at that exact moment, called it. Told you your koi would take you upstream. The following weekend, I visited my parents. They'd heard about the summit, the article, even the pop-up I'd done in Soho with an art collective. But they hadn't said much beyond the usual keep working hard and don't forget to eat. They still didn't really get it. Not the art, not the name, not what it had cost me to keep making something they never understood. But I went anyway. They greeted me like always, Dad in his slippers, Mom in the middle of chopping ginger. We sat at the kitchen table. I brought my laptop. "Can I show you something?" They nodded, a little wary. I pulled up the Basel installation video. The jackets floated in slow motion on screen, moving like ghosts through a dark gallery lit only by soft gold lights. Each one cast shadows like ripples. My name appeared in bold, clean font across the bottom. They watched in silence. My mom said nothing for a long time. Then quietly, she murmured, "You made all of that?" I nodded. "You did it? By hand?" "Yes." She reached across the table and touched the screen. Gently. Then she said something I hadn't heard from her since I was 10 years old. The day I won a city art contest and brought home a plastic trophy shaped like a paintbrush. She said, "I'm proud of you." It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic, but it was real. And in that kitchen, surrounded by the smell of fish sauce and lemongrass, something long frozen finally thawed. A few days later, Maya and I sat in the studio together, going over the new release calendar. The racks behind us were fuller than ever bold colorways, printed silks, recycled denim with acid-washed cranes. She looked at a spreadsheet and said, "You know, I used to be afraid of you." I glanced up. "Why?" "Because you didn't need to ask for permission." I shook my head. I asked. I begged. I just stopped waiting for a yes. She chuckled, then quieted. "Sometimes I wish I had been more like that. I chased attention. You built substance?" I didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. We were different. And that was okay. A month later, my first official studio space opened. It was nothing flashy. Just an old industrial unit on the edge of Williamsburg with brick walls, sun-drenched windows, and enough space to breathe. We painted the door soft gray, hung mirrors from the ceiling, added plants that Zara insisted on naming. And when we placed the sign Tui by Talia on the front, I didn't cry. I just smiled, because this was what it looked like to arrive not suddenly, but completely. Then one afternoon, a delivery came. No return label, just a plain cardboard box with my name handwritten in blue ink. Inside was a small hardcover scrapbook, every page carefully arranged, photos I hadn't seen in years, me as a child in overalls, holding paintbrushes too big for my hands, an early drawing of a dragon coiled around a pagoda, candid snapshots from school art fairs I barely remembered, and in the middle, taped carefully, was a crumpled photo of the jacket I made for Maya. She'd found it. She'd saved it. And she'd included a note. "Talia, I didn't know how to see you back then, but I do now. You were always here. You just had to leave to be visible. I'm sorry. M." I closed the book slowly, not crying, not shaking, just still. For a long time. Weeks passed. Then months. The brand kept growing international orders, sustainable collabs, even a digital art partnership with an NFT artist from Tokyo. I was booked for a speaking series across universities, but I never forgot the nights I painted koi while the city slept, the way the silence felt like company, the way rejection once echoed louder than applause. And still, I kept painting. Still, I kept going. Because somewhere in the rhythm of brush to fabric, needle to thread, I found something stronger than success. I found peace. Not the loud, performative kind, the quiet kind, the kind you feel when you walk into your own life and realize no one else gets to narrate it anymore. And every now and then, someone still asks, was it worth it? The years of being dismissed, the silence at family dinners, the self-doubt, the hustle, the heartbreak. And I always say the same thing. It had to be. Because it wasn't just about proving them wrong. It was about finally seeing myself clearly, fiercely, and without apology. And now, they work for me. But more importantly, I work for her. The girl who kept painting, even when nobody asked her to. Summer brought heat thick enough to melt paint. The city pulsed louder, angrier, but inside the studio, there was calm. We'd outgrown our early chaos, no more jackets drying in my bathtub, no more shipping labels scribbled at midnight. Now there were racks sorted by drop cycle, swatch books labeled in both English and Vietnamese, and interns who called me Miss Nguyen until I laughed and told them to knock it off. But the rhythm never changed. I still arrived first, still made my own tea, still stood at the center table in silence before anyone else showed up, just watching the space that used to be a dream I didn't say aloud. One morning, while steaming a new bomber for a shoot, I heard laughter outside. Real laughter. Maya and Zara were sitting on the curb with iced coffees, sketching out ideas on the back of a pizza box. Their knees bumped like kids on a playground. I watched them for a minute, unnoticed, and smiled. They couldn't have been more different. Maya had learned to listen more. She still moved fast, still chased structure, but she no longer pretended she knew better. She asked now. She wrote things down. She worked late and didn't complain. Zara, on the other hand, always worked like she was writing a poem out of order. Wild. Magnetic. She'd pick fabrics just because they felt like music, and then somehow make it work. And me, I floated between them. The dreamer turned builder. The loner turned leader. The ghost turned woman. That afternoon, we had a photo shoot for our newest drop, Ancestor Skins. It was the most personal work I'd done, not because of the colors or fabrics, but because of what it cost me to design it. Every piece was based on a memory I wasn't sure I'd ever share. There was a jacket modeled after my father's old barber smock dyed indigo, lined with raw canvas, the collar sewn slightly too high on purpose. Another piece echoed my mother's market dress floral patterns burnt into the fabric with heat instead of ink. The way incense leaves a trail on your sleeve. The centerpiece was a long overcoat, soft like a temple bell, with my grandmother's handwriting stitched inside the hem. It read, Con Jung Cho I Thai Con, Con Ku Lam Ji. Don't wait for anyone to see you. Just go make it. I hadn't seen her in years, but I remembered her hands veined, strong, smelling of turmeric and eucalyptus. She used to watch me draw while slicing Morning Glory, nodding occasionally but never saying much. When she died, I didn't go to the funeral. My parents said there was no point, that I had work, that I'd fallen out of the family anyway, but I kept her letters. And now, her words were sewn into something people would wear, not just read. The shoot took place in an old Chinatown tenement rooftop, full of rusted ducts and prayer flags tangled in wires. It felt right. The wind tangled the clothes mid-air. The models moved like they belonged to another decade, timeless, fragile, defiant. At one point, the photographer asked me to stand in. I hesitated, but Zara pushed me forward. You need to be in your own mythology, she said. I didn't know what that meant, but I let them snap a few shots. One with me holding the overcoat to my chest, one with my back turned, koi jacket rippling, one with my hands raised, palms paint-stained, facing the camera like they were holding the story. Afterward, I stood on the edge of the roof and looked out over the city. I remembered the first time I sketched something in the margins of my math textbook. The first time my father said, "Drawing won't feed you." The first time I painted a koi and dared to think it meant something. And now, here I was, still painting, still surviving. But not everything was clean and golden. Not every moment was soft. One evening, while editing the final layout for the Ancestor Skins lookbook, I got a call from my cousin Leanne. I hadn't spoken to her in over a year. "Talia," she said, "can I ask you something?" "Sure. Do you think the family's proud of you now?" It hit harder than I expected. I paused. I don't know. She hesitated. Because they act like they are. Like they always knew. Like it was obvious you'd get here. I let out a quiet laugh. Yeah. Funny how that works. Do you care? I thought for a long moment. I used to, I said, desperately. I used to design just to get someone at dinner to ask about me, or to get my mom to introduce me as something other than still figuring it out. And now I design so that kids like us know we don't have to be explained to be real. Leon went quiet. I heard a baby cry in the background. Her life was different, quieter, domestic. But there was something in her voice I hadn't heard before. Maybe envy, maybe awe, maybe both. Just so you know, she said, Grandma's old neighbor clipped your article and keeps it on her wall. I blinked. Wait, what? Yeah, she chuckled. Says your jackets are like old poems. She's convinced you're going to be famous. I looked down at my hands. Paint splattered, scarred, steady. I'm already full. I said, fame's just gravy. The night we launched Ancestor Skins, I didn't throw a party. No velvet ropes, no curated snacks, just a small gathering in the studio candles. Tea, old Vietnamese records spinning softly in the corner. We invited a handful of supporters, customers who'd written to us, elders from the neighborhood who remembered my parents' tailor shop. Maya poured drinks. Zara read excerpts from the story cards attached to each piece. I stood back and watched. One woman cried while touching the embroidered script. A young man took a photo of the incense-burnt jacket and said, "This smells like my mother's prayers." I didn't need a speech. The work was speaking. Late that night, after everyone left, I stood in the middle of the room alone. No lights, just the glow of the street lamp through the blinds. I traced my fingers across the jacket with Grandma's words. I whispered them once, not as a memory, but as a fact. Don't wait for anyone to see you. Don't wait for anyone to see you. That was the secret. That was the thread. I didn't wait anymore. I just kept stitching, and somehow, the world came closer. Fall came like it always does in New York, early, sudden, and a little impatient. The air sharpened, the light shifted, and the jackets we'd stitched through summer finally felt like armor again instead of art. Orders slowed, which they always did before holiday season. But I didn't panic this time. I'd built enough. The name was steady. The voice was clear. I finally had breathing room. And instead of launching a frantic promo, I took a breath and did something I hadn't done in years. I disappeared. For a week. I left the city. No phone, no emails, no Zara, no Maya. Just me, a train ticket, a duffel bag, and the small town in Virginia where my grandmother had lived during her final years. The house had long been sold, but the temple was still there. I arrived at dawn. Mist hung over the hills like silk laid gently over bone. The path to the pagoda was uneven, flanked by stone lions softened by decades of moss and wind. An old woman sweeping the steps looked up as I approached. "Ngoi na ba huin?" she asked. "Your family?" I nodded. She gave me a slow smile and opened the wooden doors without a word. Inside, incense hung thick in the air. I didn't light any. I didn't kneel. I just sat cross-legged on the woven mat she pointed to and looked around at the murals, the gilded Buddhas, the worn cushions. There was no ceremony, no revelation, just silence. And it felt sacred. Later, the old woman brought me tea. She had my grandmother's eyes round, alert, unsentimental. She didn't ask me why I came, just slid a folded cloth into my hands and walked away. It was a scarf, deep navy, hand-stitched. My grandmother's signature was embroidered into the edge. It hit me harder than I thought it would. Not because it was hers, but because it was proof she'd been watching quietly, from far away, never interfering, never pushing, just letting me bloom, even if no one else saw it. I wrapped it around my neck and walked back down the hill, back in New York. The season turned colder. The studio started humming again. Orders picked up. The holiday drop was ready, simpler this time. Soft textures, monochrome, a line called Quiet Fire. Zara said it felt like breath held in fabric. Maya called it elegantly unbothered. I just called it mine. Then, just before the new year, I got a message I didn't expect. Subject: Corporate Partnership Inquiry, Nguyen Family Holdings. It was from Uncle Kwang. He hadn't spoken to me in almost 5 years, not since he told my father I was wasting everyone's time playing dress-up. Now he was asking if I wanted to do a collaborative line with their textile company, said it could strengthen the family image and help modernize their brand. I stared at the screen for a long time. My thumb hovered over the reply button. Then I closed the tab and took a walk. Zara found me in the fabric room an hour later. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah. You look like you just swallowed glass." I laughed. Close. She sat next to me on the floor, surrounded by bolts of cloth in every shade of dusk and storm. I told her about the email, about the offer, about the years I'd spent chasing their approval like it was air. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "If you do it because it's smart, not because you need them to clap." I nodded. She was right. Later that night, I wrote a response. "Hi, Uncle. Thank you for reaching out. I appreciate the proposal. If you'd like to collaborate, I'm open to a discussion, but under the TUI by Talia brand, with my team retaining full creative direction. Let me know if you're serious. Warmly, Talia." I didn't write with anger. I wrote with clarity, because now I didn't need the door open for me. I could build my own and choose who I let in. January brought snow, a thick, silent kind of snow that covered the city like a clean canvas. One morning, I arrived at the studio early to find a note slipped under the door. No name, no envelope, just thick paper, gold ink. "I wore your jacket to my mother's funeral. She always said I hid too much. Your work helped me say what I couldn't." I stood there holding it in my paint-stained fingers. No logo, no return address, just truth. And it was enough. Our next drop wasn't even announced. We released it quietly. No campaign, no influencers, no countdown. Just a midnight post that said, "For those who stitch their names in silence, this one's for you." It sold out in 43 minutes. But more than the sales, it was the messages that came after. People sharing stories of what they wore when they divorced, or when they came out, or when they finally quit the job that made them feel small. Clothes don't save people, but stories do. And I was learning how to sew both into every seam. One morning, months later, Maya brought in a printed spreadsheet of all our hires. "We've employed 12 people this year," she said. "Most from communities that get overlooked. 5 of them said it was the first time they felt seen at work." I looked at the list. I recognized their names, but it still hit differently seeing it laid out like that. Like proof. This thing I built. It was no longer just mine. It was a living, breathing thing. A vessel. A platform. A promise. And that scared me sometimes, because I knew what it felt like to be lifted and to fall. But then I remembered the girl I used to be, alone in her apartment, painting koi in the dark. And I knew she'd want me to keep going. Sometimes I still visit that alley where our first photo shoot happened. The bricks are more cracked now. The graffiti is layered and faded. But I can still see us there, me with my cheap camera, Zara spinning in a too large coat, The city behind us like an audience that hadn't started clapping yet. We didn't wait. We danced anyway. That's what I remember now. Most of all. Not the awards, not the features, not the day they finally called me a success, but the nights we stitched with trembling hands, the days we delivered packages by foot in the rain, the moments we looked around and realized no one was coming to save us, so we saved ourselves. In silk, in thread, in silence, and then, in sound. Late winter in New York was always the hardest. Streets iced over, sky a relentless gray, everything muffled except for the city's heartbeat under your boots. It was during these months I learned how to move through loneliness, not run from it, not fight it, but let it shape me. Sometimes I'd walk home after closing the studio, my face raw from the wind, passing the same stoop where Maya once threw a party and didn't put my name on the list. Now. She waited up for me, a mug of ginger tea steaming in her hands, work spreadsheets open and ready to discuss supply chain glitches. We worked late most nights, sometimes in silence, sometimes in laughter that echoed off bare brick. The business was stable, but not safe. Every new drop was a risk, every paycheck a balance, every hire a promise I wasn't sure I could keep. I felt the weight of it, the responsibility, the trust, not just for the brand, but for the people who'd found their way to my orbit. Zara started teaching workshops in the back of the studio. She'd gather teens from the local high school, show them how to hand stitch, how to patch rips, how to tell a story in fabric. It's not about fashion, she'd say. It's about making a mark. I'd watch from the doorway sometimes, seeing myself in their nervous grins, their hesitance. A few lingered after class, helping clean up, hoping to ask if we were hiring. I made sure to remember their names. One evening, an unexpected visitor arrived. My father. He'd only been to the studio once before, years ago, and left quickly, uncomfortable in the mess and color. This time he paused at the door, hat in hand, eyes scanning the racks and mood boards. He looked older than I remembered, his hair grayer, his posture softer. I stood up and waited for him to speak. "Your mother sent me," he said, voice gruff but gentle. I nodded. He wandered through the space, trailing a hand along the jackets, pausing at a bomber with dragon embroidery. "This is your work." "All of it," I said. He didn't compliment. He didn't criticize. He just nodded, silent. Finally. He took a seat and said, "Your uncle told me about the family business. Said you could help us. I told him you were busy." I smiled, small and real. "I am." He leaned forward, elbows on knees. "It's good work. Honest work. Hard. I didn't understand it before." He looked up, his eyes wet. "But your mother's proud, even if she never says it loud." A hush settled between us. He cleared his throat. "The jackets, do they last?" I laughed. "Longer than most things." He looked relieved. "Good. I want one. Something warm. For walking." My heart caught. I promised him the first piece from the spring line. We didn't hug. But as he left, he squeezed my shoulder. It was enough. Orders ticked up again in March. We were barely keeping up. Maya handled the back-end chaos with an energy I'd never seen in her before. Graceful, unflappable. Zara juggled shoots and stories, always making the most mundane day feel magical. But with success came pressure. Bigger brands started circling, some offering to buy us out, some wanting collabs on their terms. One night, after another email from a huge retailer, Maya asked, "Are you tempted?" I shook my head. I'd rather grow slow and keep control. She nodded. "Me too. I like who we're becoming." The studio kept expanding. We hired 2 more seamstresses, both immigrants like my parents, both sending money home. I sat with them during lunch sometimes, swapping recipes and stories, letting the line between boss and peer blur just enough to feel human. It was Maya who suggested an anniversary party, a quiet celebration. No press, just friends, collaborators, and everyone who'd worked with us since the first scrappy drop. We cleared the racks, set up folding tables, and covered them in food. People brought their own stories, their own memories stitched into the seams of jackets and vests and coats. Some wore pieces from the earliest collections, faded and threadbare but loved. Others showed off new drops, pride bright in their eyes. We toasted with cheap Prosecco. Zara played music from her phone. Maya handed out handwritten thank you notes. I watched from the corner, heart full and fragile. Near midnight, someone turned down the lights. Maya tapped a glass, calling for quiet. She cleared her throat, voice wavering just a bit. A year ago, I was lost. I didn't know where I fit. Talia gave me a place, even after I ignored her, even after I tried to outshine her. She showed me what real leadership looks like, not by pushing others down, but by raising everyone up. She blinked away tears. Thank you for letting me be part of this. Thank you for teaching me how to see. There was a hush. Zara grabbed my hand. You made this, she whispered. You made all of this possible. I shook my head, unable to speak. Instead, I just looked at each face in the room, each thread of connection, each scar and smile and second chance. I thought about all the years I tried to prove myself, to fit a mold, to earn applause from the wrong audience. And here, in this tiny, imperfect studio, I had finally arrived, not as someone's cousin, not as a shadow, but as Talia founder, maker, daughter, friend. When the night wound down, I stayed behind, tidying up empty glasses and folding chairs. The quiet was different now, gentler, generous. Zara lingered, shoulder against mine. Still scared, she asked softly. Always, I said, smiling. Good. Means you care. We walked out into the street together. Snow had started to fall again, covering the city in clean white. I watched it swirl in the orange glow of the streetlight, felt it melt against my skin. For a moment, I stood still and just breathed. No more chasing, no more shrinking, just presence. And in that hush, with the world finally quiet, I knew this wasn't the ending. But it was enough. A pause, a promise, a homecoming.